Hello, my name is Gunilla. I'm a Swedish journalist and I'm also going to be moderating a debate discussion we're going to have now with our panelists. I hope you liked the film. I thought myself it was a very strong film. Interesting, fascinating and strong. And now we're going to talk about the situation for human rights defenders. As we heard before, more than 300 human rights defenders were killed last year. That is a lot. Only in 12% of the cases someone gets arrested. So the impunity is massive. Still, the world has maybe more human rights defenders than ever. So the conviction is there. The movement is global, which is good, but the impunity is too high. I'd like to introduce to you our panelists. Welcome up, please. And we will start our discussion. Let me introduce them to you. Welcome. Welcome. So we will have a discussion here now in English, in French, and then we will also open to all of you. You can ask your questions in English, French, as you like. First, I welcome Maryam Al-Khawaja, who is a human rights defender from Bahrain, consultant for numerous NGOs, and also comes from a family of defenders. Michel Forst, welcome. You're the UN Special Rapporteur on situation of human rights defenders. You've also been instrumental in the creation of the Declaration for Human Rights. This is 20 years ago now. This is what we're celebrating this year. Gerald, Staberock, welcome very much. You're the Secretary General of the World Organization Against Torture, OMCT. You also run one of the world's biggest human rights defenders protection programs, which you also heard about before, and you will tell us more about, because this is something for the future that is hopeful to make the situation better. And Ana Maria Rodriguez Valencia, welcome. You are coordinating international advocacy at the Colombian Commission of Jurists, Colombian lawyer. Welcome, all of you. Let me start by asking you what you think about the film. Your thoughts, your feelings. Would you like to start, Gerald?
Okay. Does this work? Yes. I think an impressive film, an impressive personality. But when I think about what does the film tell me about human rights defenders, our topic today, there are maybe 3 or 4 topoi that come to my heart or to my mind. The first one is belief. I always find it fascinating. You meet people from very difficult countries, and they have a very strong belief that they can change at the same time. From outside, you might think it's hopeless, but it's not. And they struggle, and they use all the tools they have to make a difference, but they have this fundamental belief that their state could be better. And I think that's something we see in human rights defenders very often. The second point is actors for change. We sometimes have this impression human rights defenders are a little bit the nerd, the nuisance, because they are against things. And I think if you see that film, you have somebody who has a vision, who wants to change the country, who wants to move it in a different direction. And we often in this land rights context have the impression somebody opposes development. I think this person here and what this organization does is much more about development, sustainable development, a better future, a better rule of law, a less corrupted world. And very much I think we should see human rights defenders as actors for change. The third quick point I put was in the very end it says, somebody said, thanks to you we know our rights. And I think this is very much about what human rights defenders are about. And maybe the fourth point is simply, You've seen a very difficult context with land rights offenders that we see in many other places. What you maybe haven't seen in the film is the level of threat that many of these people face. You had a little bit about the NGO, the defamation, etc. But I think that those are the four topoi for me that come to my mind when I see the film.
Interesting. You're quite right about the point of, now we have people didn't know about their rights. The thing we didn't see that much true is the threat and the fear. We saw the intimidation, human rights defenders, but we didn't see the threats and the fears. What do you think, Maryam? What were your reactions and thoughts?
So I mean, definitely reiterating, what my colleague was saying about one of the most basic things that you need as a human rights defender is believing that you can actually create change. Because if you don't believe that you can create change and you don't have the hope that things will change, then it's very difficult to continue working as a human rights defender. But I think what really struck me is how, doing outreach and being a part of communities is also a way to change. And I think that that's a very important discussion that needs to be ongoing all the time within the human rights community, that we shouldn't view, the work of human rights and defending human rights as a top-bottom approach, where we think we're coming in as human rights defenders and telling people how they should be doing things, but rather working within the community, with the community, to build a better country, for sure.
Michel, les questions, vous préférez parler en français peut-être, votre réflexion après avoir vu les films.
D'abord, je crois qu'il faut d'abord nier les qualités cinématographiques du film. Je trouve que c'est un grand film et je ne suis pas membre du jury, mais je veux dire que si j'étais membre du jury, je dirais voilà un bon film qui mériterait éventuellement d'entrer en compétition avec d'autres. Mais plus sérieusement, ce qui m'a frappé dans le film, c'est d'abord le reflet d'une réalité que je rencontre tous les jours quand je voyage dans les pays et que je rencontre les défenseurs, c'est que dans beaucoup de cas, on ne choisit pas de devenir un défenseur, en fait. Et c'est le cas de Silas, en fait. C'est bien souvent parce qu'on est soi-même menacé, attaqué dans sa vie familiale, dans ses proches, dans le travail qu'on fait, ou simplement dans la terre qu'on cultive, qu'on devient un défenseur parce qu'on essaie de défendre ce qui, en fait, constitue le cœur même de la vie. Et combien de femmes en Amérique latine, au Jammu, au Cachemire, sont devenues des défenseurs simplement pour avoir cherché à retrouver celles ou ceux qui avaient disparu, qui avaient été enlevés, torturés par les autorités. Et puis, comme le montre le film, et comme l'a rappelé Gerald, ceux qui sont à l'heure actuelle les plus menacés, ce sont les défenseurs du droit à l'environnement. Vous avez justement rappelé le nombre de meurtres, d'assassinats de défenseurs qu'on a noté depuis quelque temps, mais c'est vrai que ceux qui sont les plus menacés, les plus tués, les plus assassinés sont les défenseurs du droit à l'environnement. Et puis là, le deuxième élément que je voudrais signaler, qui va aussi peut-être guider une partie de la réflexion, c'est que c'est un film qui a un grand mérite, qui est de montrer un vrai portrait de défenseur, sans cacher les limites et les failles du personnage. Et je dois dire que c'est important pour moi, pour nous, parce qu'on mène une grande campagne pour le 20e anniversaire de la déclaration sur les défenseurs, de changer l'image des défenseurs, de les montrer sous un angle positif, de montrer qu'ils ne sont pas des ennemis de l'État, ils ne sont pas des ennemis de l'environnement, ils ne sont pas des ennemis du progrès ou du développement, ils sont des femmes et des hommes qui essayent de rendre réels les droits et les libertés qu'on a proclamés voilà 70 ans. Et j'espère que les ambassades auront à cœur également de montrer dans les différents pays des portraits de défenseurs, pas toujours les défenseurs les plus connus, mais ces hommes et des femmes qui au quotidien, parfois dans des conditions difficiles, dans les lieux écartés, sont des défenseurs et ont besoin d'être protégés, et donc on a besoin de montrer leur histoire.
Interesting. I want to pick up on a couple of points there after, but first I want to ask you also what your thoughts were and impressions from the film.
Well, I would highlight 2 points also. The first one is that I was thinking at some moment during the film that the scenes we were seeing with what was happening to communities, the approach of companies could be happening not only in Liberia, but anywhere in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Honduras, in Peru, or almost anywhere. And the situation that communities face and what defenders do there is very similar, although they are indigenous leaders, peasant leaders, Afro-descendants anywhere. So although particular countries have particular conditions, the problems are very similar, and the work that we have to do as defenders is similar. And on the other hand, it was very nice to see the everyday life of a defender, what their families have to go through, what their friends think of you all the time. You usually tend to think as a defender on you and your job and your commitment, and many times you forget the people that surround you. And I like very much from the movie that you can see what the family has to deal when you are a defender.
Yeah, I thought that was also a very smart thing to do. You really saw from the eyes of another person, not only the defender himself. 20 years of the Human Rights Declaration. I want to ask you about this. It, of course, was very important. It was created. 20 years has passed. What has really been accomplished? What has changed? Has the situation become better for human rights in the world? Really?
That's the easy question.
Who wants to start?
Voilà, je ne vais pas répondre forcément directement à la question qui m'a été posée. C'est souvent ce que j'essaie de faire quand je suis embarrassé devant les questions qu'on me pose. Donc, mais j'ai envie de dire que si je me projette 30 ans en arrière, à l'époque où j'étais directeur d'Amnesty en France, et où nous recevions avec les autres membres d'Amnesty tellement de demandes en fait, de défenseurs qui en fait n'étaient pas nommés défenseurs à l'époque, mais étaient des militants d'ONG, des individus qui se battaient pour leurs droits. On se rend compte que depuis 20 ans, beaucoup de choses ont été faites et beaucoup de progrès ont été accomplis. Ne serait-ce qu'en matière de protection. J'espère qu'on aura le temps de parler un peu plus des progrès réalisés, mais aussi des échecs, de ce qui reste à faire devant nous. Mais la plus grande des victoires pour moi, c'est bien sûr cette déclaration qui nous donne de l'espoir et qui permet d'avoir une définition très large de ce que sont les défenseurs. Pas seulement des militants d'ONG, pas seulement personnes qui sont encartées dans un groupement, mais toute personne, tout individu, une femme, un homme, un enfant qui essaie de promouvoir les droits et les libertés est un défenseur, même s'il est parfois aussi un activiste politique. Et puis le deuxième élément, c'est que pour moi, c'est le grand succès, c'est la création de ces millions de groupes, d'organisations de femmes et d'hommes défenseurs, ces réseaux régionaux de plus en plus forts, de plus en plus renforcés, qui œuvrent chaque jour au péril de leur liberté, de leur vie, pour rendre réels ces droits et libertés. Et dans le même temps, ce qui est frappant, et c'est le pendant de votre question, c'est que plus les réseaux sont forts, plus les défenseurs sont forts, mieux ils sont organisés, plus la répression est féroce. Et la répression, à l'heure actuelle, est féroce de la part des États. Ça n'est pas une violence aveugle, c'est une violence ciblée qui cible les responsables. Et ça n'est pas pour rien qu'on a assassiné des personnes qui portent un prix comme le prix Goldman. On a vu l'assassinat de Berta Cáceres, de Isidro Baldenegro, et je crains aussi, peut-être pour la vie de Silas, qui est aussi un des lauréats de ces grands prix. Et les États deviennent de plus en plus féroces de la part des États, mais également, on le voit dans le film, de la part d'acteurs non étatiques que sont les entreprises. Et il faut donc maintenant continuer à développer des mécanismes qui permettent de s'affronter ou de confronter ces nouvelles menaces qui pèsent sur les défenseurs. Et il y a à l'heure actuelle des mécanismes qui ont été créés. On ne va pas en parler maintenant peut-être, on en parlera plus tard. Mais en tout cas, ces mécanismes sont aussi efficaces pour protéger les défenseurs.
Would you like to say something, Gerald?
Maybe just in the same line. We celebrate 70 years of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and only 20 years of the Human Rights Defenders Declaration. You would think that the two are connected, that if you set out the rights, the most fundamental one is that people in peace and security can work on the realization of those rights. And apparently it took 50 years to recognize this, and I think this is the significance that happened 20 years ago. And I think that's very fundamental, and I agree with Michel Forst that we've never been as global as a human rights movement. I mean, maybe on a more personal note, when I was a student and then an intern here in Geneva at some point, and you went to some UN meeting, you had only Western organizations being there. If you go there today, people are from everywhere. My own organization, the World Organization Against Torture, is a network. We started with 30 organizations or something in 30 years ago. Now it's 290. It's everywhere, and I think that's very important because we sometimes forget the achievements that we've done. We speak about human rights defenders protection, and we're always on the protection side, so we deal with the threats, but we shouldn't forget those achievements. And we shouldn't also forget that maybe 20 years ago, the fight for LGBT rights, the fight for disability rights, was at a very different state where it is today. But as Michel said, and I think that's worth the discussion, is as we become more global, as we are more a real movement, we face a new wind that comes our way, and more threats, and more laws, and more killings, and more impunity.
If I may add. I mean, I definitely agree with what has been said, but I think that from, I've been working as a human rights defender for 9 years now, officially. And I've seen, I think that I might be a little more pessimistic. Given how, if we look at the situation in the world today, and the political climate in the world today, I would say that we are regressing when it comes to human rights, unfortunately. Even the countries who generally were seen as being on the forefront of protecting and defending human rights and human rights defenders. Countries like Scandinavia, for example. I'm a Danish citizen, and I know that Denmark and some other countries in Scandinavia have now cut down funding in some of the countries by 40% for protection of human rights defenders. And so we're seeing the situation, unfortunately, get worse when you're looking at how the elections are going in places like Poland and Hungary and Italy, and now we already had in the United States. I think generally we're looking at a situation where if we don't understand the importance of intersectionality when it comes to human rights, and as was mentioned, how our struggles as human rights defenders, but also as populations, are actually very much connected and attached to each other, we are going to get into a situation that is much worse. And I think that the best evidence of this is that, after Rwanda, after World War II, after all of that, and a lot of these institutions are the product of those events, we said never again. We said this will happen, never again. And yet it's happening over and over again. It's happening in Syria, it's happening in Yemen, it's happening in Myanmar, it's happening in Iraq, and it's a continuation. And unfortunately, despite these institutions, despite some of the progress that we have made, for example, now, for the first time, we have, special mechanisms on reprisals, how to deal with cases of human rights defenders who interact with the UN and who are then targeted specifically for interacting with the UN. But the United Nations as an institution is so politicized that there are people, for example, in Bahrain who have spent the last 7 years in prison, like my father, and who wasn't someone who is a case of reprisal, and yet he's still in prison. And the number of people who are actually being subjected to reprisals has increased, not decreased. And so I think that generally it's easy to talk about, how great human rights defenders are and how we wish we could support them, and, how we love Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and if we were there those days, we would have marched with them down the streets. But there are thousands of Gandhis and Martin Luther Kings today sitting in prison cells. We can march with them, and we can stand with them.
On a more personal note there, what made, especially the two of you, you're really human rights defenders in the field, so to speak, what made you become human rights defender? Do you want to start?
Yes.
Your own personal story.
I guess my story is not as interesting as yours. No, I just went to college, went to law school, was not feeling very comfortable into other fields of law, and started wondering what's actually happening in my country. Many decades of unarmed conflict in Colombia, lots of different types of violence. I wanted to learn more, and I started to approach a little bit to some of those issues, and I started to feel like I also wanted to help in a way, to make a contribution from what I could do at that point, and so it started 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago. And Maryam, is it your father that plays a big role? Or?
Well, I would say definitely my father for sure, but I think my mother mostly as well. My mother is the strongest woman that I've ever met. We grew up in a house where we were taught about human rights, and we were taught about how important it is to stand up and fight for justice. And so one of the things that we were taught, when every night before we slept, we had to ask, what did I do today to make something better for someone other than myself? And if the answer was nothing, then that was a day wasted. And so that's the kind of lesson that we grew up learning. But I think what really pushed me to be in the role that I'm in today is the revolution in Bahrain, the uprising. Having been there on the ground, watching people around me get killed, get tortured, get imprisoned. And that's why for me, while I might talk about my father's case because I know him personally, obviously, his family and so on, but my father is not the exception, he's the rule. We have thousands of people who are in prison, thousands of people who are paying such a high price for simply demanding things like basic human rights and democracy and elections. And so for me, just watching how thousands of people came to the streets and demanded democracy, demanded human rights, the best way to describe it is kind of like if you've been living underwater most of your life and then you come out above water and you breathe for the first time. That's what it felt like in 2011. It was as if for the first time we knew what oxygen felt like. And you can't take that away from someone. You can't pull someone back underwater after they've tried having oxygen and tell them you're going to live underwater again. And that's why the protests continue till today.
How is it being a woman and human rights defenders? Is it tougher? Do you have more threats, more intimidation, a more difficult time to work? I'd like to hear from both of you, and also from you being, the rapporteur. What would you say?
Well, I would say we face the usual attacks and the usual aggressions, the threats of killings, disappearances. The regular attacks that a defender suffers. But I think we also suffer two types of additional aggressions. One has to do with our role as women, in many cases as mothers or members of a family. So we have seen many cases in Colombia of sexual aggressions against defenders, or not necessarily against the defender, but the persons around her. Their relatives, their daughters, the women that work with them are the targets of the attacks, or threats against their children, or harassment to the children around the school, things like that. And on the other side, there's the challenges that are more internal, so to say it, that have to do with the usual practices, labor practices being a woman. So you have to face salary issues, you have to face, relations with your bosses, you have to face not being listened at some point, even if you're saying the same thing as your neighbor, but he's a man, he's listened to, you're not. So are not particular challenges for women human rights defenders. But it's harder if you're trying to raise your voice or share a message with a lot of people and you are not listened to because you're a woman.
Interesting. Maryam, do you find that too?
Yes, definitely. I think, so most of my work right now, because I'm sentenced to 1 year in Bahrain and I'm wanted there, so I can't go back. So most of my time I spend it outside of the Middle East, mostly in Europe and the United States. And I think it's 2 degrees. One is being a woman and the other is being a woman of color. Because being a woman of color also has its impacts, and you're even less so listened to, and you're, again and again told how articulate you are, and you're asked why your English is so good, and things like that. And so I've definitely had a lot of experience with that, so definitely agree with everything that was said. The only other thing that I would mention is discourse. I think what's extremely problematic is discourse, because when we talk about the role of women, we always talk about it as if it was something that wasn't very natural, that came as an addition. And so we talk about how women joined the revolution. We talk about how the women human rights defenders joined the human rights community, as if it's not something that came naturally and was organic. But if you look at history, and yes, it's his story, and we need more of her story because that's usually not documented as well. But for example, just to take Bahrain as an example, where we've had one of the oldest civil rights movements in the region since the 1920s, with uprisings almost every 10 years, women have always been at the forefront of that. Women have always led. Women have always, been subjected to the same violations and crimes by the government because they were at the forefront. And so I think one of the things that we also need to do, even us women ourselves, we need to change our discourse. And we need to change the way we talk about these things and make sure that when we talk about it, we're using the correct form and the correct terminology.
Michel, do you see that women are more under threat, have a more challenging time being a female, a woman human rights defenders?
Définitivement, quand j'ai commencé avec ce mandat en 2014, j'ai rencontré des représentants de la coalition mondiale des femmes défenseurs qui m'ont dit, lors de tes prochains voyages, tu devrais essayer de rencontrer des femmes seules, demander aux hommes de quitter la pièce et tu verras ce qui se passera. On t'en dit pas plus, tu verras. Et effectivement, je l'ai fait, maintenant je continue à le faire. Et chaque fois que je fais une visite officielle dans un pays ou bien une visite non officielle, invitée par une université ou par un groupe, j'organise une rencontre avec uniquement les femmes défenseurs. Et chaque fois, c'est les mêmes récits, les mêmes témoignages qui viennent d'être en partie dits aujourd'hui sur le fait d'être d'abord un défenseur, subir des attaques en tant que défenseur et en addition, être une femme, subir des agressions qui sont typiquement celles qu'on rencontre à l'encontre des femmes. Donc des menaces à caractère sexuel, des menaces sur la famille, des menaces sur les enfants, des menaces également sur les parents. Beaucoup de femmes nous racontent que, parce qu'elles sont dans beaucoup de pays en charge des grands-parents, des parents en fait, on s'attaque également aussi à leurs parents. Et puis combien de femmes racontent également à quel point c'est difficile lorsqu'on est vraiment menacé de mort, de quitter le lieu où on milite, de quitter sa famille, son endroit. C'est facile pour un homme de quitter... il est menacé, il y a des solutions, maintenant on a des techniques qui permettent de le mettre à l'abri à l'étranger, mais pour les femmes c'est toujours un combat parce qu'en fait elles ne veulent pas quitter leur famille, bien sûr pas leurs enfants, et on n'a pas de vraie solution pour mettre à l'abri les femmes défenseurs avec les enfants. Heureusement il y a quelques initiatives dans le monde qui se mettent en place dans cette direction. Et puis le deuxième élément, c'est ce qu'a décrit notre témoin d'aujourd'hui, c'est le comportement dans les organisations non gouvernementales. C'est tout à fait frappant et même un peu hallucinant de voir ce que j'entends dans le comportement des organisations, des femmes qui racontent être reléguées dans des droits qui sont jugés comme étant des droits mineurs, comme le droit à l'éducation, le droit à la santé, alors que les droits durs, les droits civils et politiques sont plutôt réservés aux hommes. Et peut-être pour terminer, une anecdote qui illustre bien ce que j'essaie de raconter. J'ai voulu organiser des consultations spécifiques pour les femmes défenseurs dans le monde. Et je me souviens d'une fois où nous avons écrit une lettre en demandant à une femme défenseur de venir participer à une réunion qu'on organisait en Europe. Et en retour, on a reçu une lettre disant, eh bien, nous avons consulté, c'est le directeur de l'organisation qui viendra. Je dis non, je veux cette femme-là. Et en réponse, on m'a dit, écoutez, dans ce cas-là, il n'y aura pas de participation de notre organisation. C'est caricatural, mais c'est aussi un peu emblématique de ce qu'on peut rencontrer dans le combat des femmes dans leur propre organisation.
Gunilla, may I add something?
Of course.
No, I was remembering listening to Michel of a history we had a couple of months ago. Some of my colleagues were taking part of a discussion with the National Protection Unit in Colombia, who's in charge of offering protection measures for defenders at risk. And this was a really weird discussion because it was a woman human rights defender that has to leave her town. And the discussion was because she was asking for the inclusion in her protection measures of the guarantee of school for her kids, and she wanted a scheme of vaccination for her kids, and she was asking for some type of medicines, I don't remember right now, and it was a huge discussion because the members of the protection unit did not understand why school or medicines or these type of things were part of protection measures. For them, it was a matter of a car, of a house, of a vest, of a cell phone, but not schooling. Why school? Why things for kids? And she was saying, I cannot live alone. I need to bring my family with me, but I cannot take my kids out of school if I cannot guarantee that they are going to school somewhere else. So it was a huge discussion. It was really, really difficult to come to an agreement because it was really difficult for them to understand what it was about.
Gerald, I wanted to ask you, you said that now it's become human rights defenders, it's a global movement. It is now everywhere and it's growing and it's coming really from inside countries. But at the same time, do we also see that the risks are really becoming bigger? I mean, I'm thinking both physical risks and legal risks.
I would say so. I think human rights defenders' work is not in isolation of the human rights situation in countries generally and the global context of human rights. And obviously, we think we face a climate change on human rights and maybe even more. You have more and more countries that question the validity of human rights. You have discourses on national security, ISIS and others. You have migration discourses that are real game changer in how you see human rights. And then the threats to human rights defenders are sort of a consequences that comes after this. We have enormous physical threats, and there I think you have some regions or countries where the threat is physical in particular. You have Latin America with democracies who have the highest murder rates of human rights defenders. You have other countries where it's more legal measures. Think about Russia, where you have a plethora of laws that try to suffocate the human rights movement. And especially what we've seen over the last couple of years is the emergence of all these laws. You have one law after the other that makes it very difficult for organizations to function, to receive foreign funding, etc., whatever it is. But it is a concerted effort to suffocate the movement. And it targets in particular the global connection. In the old days, it was probably a protection if you were associated as a local organization with an international network. Now it can be a factor of risk if you're a human rights defender in Egypt today. If you receive funding from abroad as part of development aid, which is quite normal, this can be the reason to go against you. If you report to the United Nations, this can be a reason that you're targeted. So I think states see the impact that human rights work has, and they try to prevent it. And we see this all over the place. So I think, and there I agree with you, while we should celebrate what we have achieved in 20 years, while the movement is stronger, while we have won certain battles, there's clearly now a climate change. And I think this is also where Europe becomes important. I've been to Brussels a couple of weeks ago for a parliamentary hearing. The discourse you hear about NGO transparency and lacking accountability is mind-boggling to me. I mean, you've seen in this film a very corrupted government accusing the NGO community basically of being unaccountable, non-transparent. Yeah. The more corrupted, the more we hear this from governments. And I think that there is a suffocation that we see targeting the human rights movement as such.
All right, but then, well, you have the Human Rights Declaration for Human Rights Defenders, 20 years. It's a global movement. You're also saying that there are more threats and intimidations and legal obstacles. But can we see, and we have situations today like Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Myanmar, but is it getting better in any of these countries where human rights defenders are really active? Can we see, because you're giving me the picture that it's really getting worse. We have 20 years, it's become a global movement, but it's more difficult to be a human rights defender. Isn't it the opposite in any place?
I think to some extent, when you're effective and you hurt powerful interests, you have the counter-reaction. And you will always have in the world some countries where you have progress. Maybe in Tunisia, being a human rights defender, despite all difficulties today, is better than it was under Ben Ali. So there's no one solution for everything. And obviously the countries you have mentioned are countries that are gross human rights violations and deteriorating situations. But what I find striking is that you also have countries you don't talk about. India, a democracy, proud democracy, rule of law. One organization after the other is losing the right to receive foreign funding. We have a member organization that has been the permit cancelled to receive foreign funding. Why? Because they worked with UN Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. And nobody speaks about these countries. So the instinct is to say we speak about Yemen, we speak about Syria, we speak about Myanmar. But when it comes to human rights defenders, you could name so many of these other countries where you see really backlashes coming.
What? Yes, go ahead first.
If I can just add very quickly, I mean, I remember seeing this graffiti in Beirut that really stuck out to me, which says, it's very dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. And I think that that explains it really well. But I think one of the reasons why, even though we are making progress in regards to resolutions and declarations and to some extent also international law of protection for human rights, I think the main problem is that we have institutions that have been set up for protection of human rights that don't have the ability of accountability because of the way they're set up. And so if the United Nations, for example, because the Security Council has veto power, that's why Syria is still in the situation it's in, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing with many other countries. And so the problem is with accountability. If there's a reason for the government not to do what they're doing, it's because they're worried about being punished. If they know they're not going to be punished, if they know that there is, a culture of impunity, then they have no incentive to stop the violations.
Two questions there. One, how would you define a human rights defender? What is a human rights defender? How do you become a human rights defender?
On a la chance d'avoir une définition qui a été acceptée par consensus par tous les États, voilà 20 ans. C'est celle qui figure dans la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les défenseurs des droits de l'homme, dont on célèbre le 20e anniversaire cette année, et qui, par chance, nous offre une définition très large. Comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, pas besoin d'être membre d'une ONG pour être un défenseur, pas besoin d'être enregistré, pas besoin de le faire à plein temps, pas besoin d'être payé ou d'être bénévole. Il suffit simplement d'agir pour les droits, de protéger, de promouvoir les droits, et ça fait de vous un défenseur. Alors on peut être plein de choses à la fois. On peut être comme au Bahreïn ou en Tunisie, comme on l'était sous Ben Ali, un activiste politique, un militant politique, et en même temps, parce que étant activiste politique, combattant pour la liberté, promouvoir des élections libres et démocratiques, la liberté de se réunir, la liberté de pouvoir manifester dans les rues, de pouvoir s'exprimer, de pouvoir tweeter, de pouvoir utiliser les réseaux sociaux, on est attaqué par toute forme d'attaque que Gilbert a rappelé. Et cette définition, il faut la protéger, il faut la garder précieusement parce qu'elle est pour nous une garante pour l'avenir. Et malheureusement, ce qu'on constate à l'heure actuelle, c'est que les États dont on vient de parler lancent des attaques de plus en plus féroces contre cette définition. Ils le font de manière sophistiquée, en sous-main, mais aussi publiquement maintenant aux Nations Unies, lorsqu'on discute de résolutions dans lesquelles le mot défenseur des droits humains est utilisé. Certains États, dont la Russie, menés par la Russie, avec d'autres, refusent maintenant que l'on nomme on emploie le terme de défenseur des droits humains, disant que le terme n'est pas enregistré sur le plan légal, qu'il n'a pas d'existence. Or, il l'est, bien évidemment, dans plein de résolutions des Nations Unies. Et en menant ce combat, leur idée est de dire qu'il ne faut qu'on reconnaître comme défenseurs seules les personnes qui sont enregistrées dans des organisations reconnues par l'État. Et bien évidemment, c'est l'État qui va décider lui-même, seul, quelles sont les organisations qui peuvent être enregistrées, laissant de côté, hors de la protection des Nations Unies, tous les défenseurs qui ne seront pas dans ces organisations enregistrées.
Yes, I would say that the biggest, or one of the biggest achievements after 20 years of having the declaration is precisely that you can now find people that recognizes themselves as defenders, people that 20 years or 10 years ago wouldn't have to. Now you find indigenous leaders, you find peasants in faraway regions, you find sexual workers, you find many different people that now recognize themselves as defenders, believe they have the right to defend what they are defending, and are empowered to go and ask from their authorities and from the state that the rights are respected. And I think that although we face new challenges and every time we find a new way to defend a right, the perpetrators find another one to violate them, that's an achievement, and that's a step forward. We are growing up as I don't know if a community, but as a group of people that believe that rights have to be defended, and I would say that's the biggest achievement in these 20 years.
Maybe just in the same token, when I grew up, I thought about human rights offenders like the Sakharovs of this world. In my generation, maybe this was, but it was always the sort of political dissident or human rights activist and what we see now is anybody in land rights issues, etc. So the notion of who is a human rights defender and our consciousness of that, I think, has changed a lot. But I also wanted to get back to what Michel said about the recognized organizations. A very concrete, practical example. If I want to visit in my organization Egypt today, I'm told I can meet NGOs if they are registered. But basically, no organization that works on torture, provide victim support to torture victims, will be recognized. But basically, you can come and talk, but to nobody.
I just want to get back to what you were talking about too, Marianne, on impunity. I mean, as we said before, 12% of the people are being, in 12% of the cases, people are being arrested for killing human rights defenders. How are we going to get around this? How are we going to increase this figure?
Well, I mean, I think it's like I said, part of it is having mechanisms that actually have accountability measures, because, I mean, now when we're talking about the United Nations, it's only when there's political will and political support on a specific case or issue that you're going to actually get accountability, otherwise it doesn't exist. But also strengthening mechanisms that already exist and maybe thinking around how we can create new mechanisms. But for example, we have the OECD complaint mechanism in the EU, which allows people to go after companies, but that doesn't have an accountability measure either. And so I think that we have a long way to go, and part of it is by pushing and by understanding the intersectionality. Connecting social movements, I think, is going to become even more and more important as we move forward. But I think finally also, like, looking at what we already have and seeing how we can strengthen it, like the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So for example, you know, the Universal Declaration talks about all of the things that were relevant and are still relevant, but one of the things that is not mentioned in there is digital rights. Right? Like, we don't think about how our presence digitally, we actually have a digital body that exists online, just like our physical body. And that digital body should also have rights the way our physical body does. And many of our governments are today, you know, targeting human rights defenders through digital methodologies. And so we need to start thinking, well, how do we update the things that we have now, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the mechanisms and so on, to also make sure that they are looking into all of this new technology that we have and how that influences and is being used against human rights defenders as well.
Then you said, Michel, too, that you think it's important we should change the image of the human rights defenders, so they should not be looked upon as enemies. What do you mean by that, and how should that change be done?
Peut-être avant de répondre, je voudrais compléter le propos de Maryam qui me paraît important. Et votre question était également importante, c'est la raison pour laquelle il ne faut pas qu'on y passe trop vite, la question de l'impunité. Je crois que d'abord c'est important de rappeler que c'est d'abord aux États qu'appartient la responsabilité première de protéger les défenseurs. Et ce qu'on constate à l'heure actuelle, c'est que les États ne le font pas. Et s'il y a effectivement une telle défaillance dans la lutte contre l'impunité, c'est parce qu'il n'y a pas de vraie capacité ou de volonté de l'État de le faire. Dans combien de pays j'ai voyagé et rencontré des systèmes judiciaires qui sont défaillants pour de multiples raisons, pour avoir été corrompus. Et dans un grand nombre de pays, on voit l'appareil judiciaire infiltré par la corruption, par le crime organisé, rendant ineffectif toute tentative de vouloir lutter contre l'impunité et de mener à bien des enquêtes pour mettre la lumière, mettre à jour, donner les responsables, traduire les responsables de justice de ceux qui sont responsables d'atteintes aux droits humains. Donc c'est un véritable combat qui porte et qui passe d'abord par la restauration de l'état de droit, l'indépendance des pouvoirs, des trois pouvoirs dans les pays, mais aussi des mesures très concrètes que les États doivent prendre ou peuvent prendre pour améliorer les capacités de fonctionnement du système judiciaire de leur propre pays. Je suis horrifié quand je voyage dans plusieurs pays qu'on me dit que le taux de succès des investigations est proche de 1%. Et on se félicite de ce 1%. Ça veut dire que 99% des cas restent sans solution, sans investigation. Et on me dit souvent que c'est parce que la police n'a pas les moyens, parce qu'elle a peur des représailles, parce que l'appareil judiciaire est corrompu, parce que les juges eux-mêmes sont menacés, ne peuvent pas mener à bien leur activité. Donc il y a un vrai combat contre l'impunité que plusieurs se sont attachés à à mener à bien, et il y a des outils qui ont été développés qui permettent d'aider les États en la matière. Maintenant, pour répondre à votre question, ce qui est clair, c'est que c'est l'image de ces défenseurs qu'il faut changer. Il faut changer l'image négative qu'ils ont dans beaucoup de pays du monde. On les présente aujourd'hui dans ce film, on le présente, Silas et ses collègues et ses femmes défenseurs, sous une image positive, et c'est ça qu'il faut faire. Il faut essayer de contrer les attaques dont Gerald a parlé, des attaques de l'État qui les présentent comme ennemis de l'État, comme activistes politiques avec un agenda politique, promoteurs de valeurs occidentales lorsqu'ils essayent de parler de droits sexuels et reproductifs. Donc plein d'images très négatives portées par les États, relayées également par un discours politique des parlements. Il doit dire que certains pays de l'Union européenne, et tu as eu raison de le mentionner tout à l'heure, portent une responsabilité importante. C'est-à-dire que quand on entend certains pays traiter les défenseurs comme ils le font, ça laisse rêveur, alors que l'Union européenne avait la réputation et est toujours l'un des principaux acteurs dans la protection des droits humains et des défenseurs humains. Donc ces attaques progressives à l'intérieur de l'Union européenne me font peur également, parce que j'y vois une menace flagrante, difficile sur les défenseurs des droits humains en Europe. Et pour terminer, je veux dire que, voyageant beaucoup, certains États me disent de manière cynique, écoutez, si la Hongrie le fait, si la Pologne va le faire, si en France également on condamne des défenseurs pour avoir porté aide aux migrants, alors écoutez, voilà, donc laissez-nous en paix.
One concrete question on Colombia. You have a peace agreement, and we tend to think that things are fine or getting fine now in Colombia. And then, is there the same need for human rights defenders? Isn't the situation taken care of because you have the peace agreement?
Yes. The situation is really difficult. We can say that figures related with many human rights violations are actually better. The number of killings in general has reduced. The number of kidnappings has reduced, but the violence against human rights defenders, unfortunately, is getting worse and worse and worse. So we passed from having 63 defenders killed in 2015 to having over 100 killed last year. So
why is this, when you have the peace agreement as a parallel development? Why is this happening?
It's well, because although we believe the peace agreement is really important, and the implementation of the agreement is actually trying to achieve some substantial changes into the country, we still are facing structural human rights problems that have not been solved, and defenders are fighting for those problems. And if we talk about land issues, if we talk about inclusion, if we talk about LGBT people, if we talk about torture, we are still talking about the same problems that we were dealing before the peace agreement, and those have not changed a bit since the peace agreement was signed. Colombia is still the third most unequal country in our continent. And that makes it very difficult for those people living in the faraway areas where the FARC guerrillas were in power to find alternatives for living if there's not a strong transformation from the state, like in general, that includes these people into like the system. So defenders have been trying to raise some of those issues, have been kept on defending territories, indigenous territories, Afro-Colombian territories, from new investors, from projects similar to the ones we saw in the movie here, palm oil, infrastructure building, all types of things. And the response to that is new or other or the same old armed groups attacking them, other interests behind. And I would come then back to your question related on impunity. We have a rate of over 95% of impunity cases. We have over 1,000 death threats in the last 5 or 6 years, and we have 1 conviction for a death threat in Colombia. We have a couple of convictions for killings, but those killings only sanction the person that actually shot or killed the defender, but doesn't go into who was behind that, doesn't look for the motives doesn't look for the interests that were behind the killing. So it's a matter actually of political will, I would say. I agree with you. We have lots of laws, decrees, all type of legal norms. We have a huge judiciary. We have everything you can think of if you wish to actually make justice, and it doesn't happen.
But then we have a positive to look forward before we open now to have your questions too. I just want to have, something that actually is positive, and it sounds like the Protect Defenders, your project, is something that gives hope, Gerald.
Give me hope. That's a good question at the end. No, maybe to say that I think there are some areas where a lot of work has been developed over the years. And OMCT and other organizations have been doing a lot of human rights defenders protection work. I think where we progress is really how we as NGO community, also with the help of certain states, and with the mandates like Michel Forst's mandate, how can we do protection work when there are immediate threats? How can we alert that something is happening? And very often alerting through a public appeal, mobilizing the media, having Michel Forst and others intervene can be life-saving. It can make a difference between the disappearance and torture or not. So there are systems that are in place, and I think the delegate from the European delegation has mentioned Protect Defenders. Protect Defenders is a consortium of 12 organizations with expertise in human rights defenders protection, and OMCT is one of the 4 leading organizations in that, and that means intervening when there's a case. Let's assume, and this we do also with what is called the Observatory for the Protection of Human Rights, a program we have. Let's assume there's a defender in Bangladesh, Adil, a friend of ours. He gets arrested the day we have the fireworks here in Geneva. He gets arrested by somebody, nobody knows who the people were that arrested him. So it's immediately important that there's an alert going out, that people mobilize, that the government there knows somebody's watching. That can be huge security at that moment. But then mobilizing people who can help in that situation. Security grants, emergency grants, IT security, legal support. There is a possibility to provide defenders with that type of protection. In the worst case, with relocation into security into a third country. You have even in Europe a number of countries that have shelter cities, institutions where people like writers in need can go when they're immediately threatened. So there's a lot of work happening, and we're doing a lot of work every year for more than 300 defenders under threat in that sense. But all this is at the last line. It's about the physical protection. And I think if we really want to advance in the protection of human rights defenders, we also have to stand by their causes. We have to support them in the causes they present. In a way, not being just agnostic and say if there's a physical threat, we relocate somebody. No, we want that these people can continue working in their country. It's a drama that Maryam is sitting here in a way and not working in Bahrain at the moment. So we have to think of what are the tools we can employ so that people can continue their work in the country. But yes, Protect Defenders is a huge help to defenders with emergency grants, with relocation, institutional support when that support is not there. It's a lifeline of support that is there, and we're very grateful to have that possibility to help.
But Maryam, are you afraid? What makes you continue working like you do? Aren't you scared?
The easy answer would be no. I think that we broke the barrier of fear in 2011, but I also have to admit that I'm speaking from a place of privilege. I live in Denmark. I don't live in Bahrain. Albeit I do get threats, and I know that I'm targeted, and I know that I'm generally not 100% safe anywhere I go. But I think that what happens is that you find something that's more important than your fear. So even, right now I would say I'm not afraid, but when I was in Bahrain, I was. And when I was in prison, I was afraid. But I think what I learned from my father and from my mom and from others is that courage is not the absence of fear. It's finding something that's more important to do than giving into your fear. And so that's what courage is, because if the fear doesn't exist, then it's not really courage. It's something normal that anyone can do, right? But if I can just add very quickly as well, Protect Defenders, I think, has done, they've done a massive job at helping people and relocation and so on, because I've actually seen a lot of those cases. I think one thing that to me is very important that I think sometimes gets lost in the conversation is governments have now learned that if they can keep someone in prison long enough, they tend to be forgotten, or there isn't as much work on their cases anymore. So if the government can put up with all of the initial backlash of, especially with high-profile defenders, putting them in prison, after 5, 6, 7 years, there isn't as much attention on their cases anymore, and they can spend a really long time in prison. And so I think this is like Protect Defenders is a really great initiative, and it's a really great project, and it's really making a lot of difference. And I think one of the things that we need to also start thinking about as well, how do we also address the cases of people who have now been in prison for 15 years, 10 years, 7 years, as well.
One example there is Davik Isaac, of course, in the Eritrean, Swedish Eritrean, who is in prison in Eritrea since many, many years now. We don't even know if he's alive. I now want to give the floor to all of you who have listened, for you to ask questions or make comments. I'm trying to see a hand over there. A lady in blue, please go ahead. There's a microphone that will come.
I think we heard a lot about corrupted governments, but we didn't talk a lot about the corruptors. So I wanted to know whether the human rights defender, what they think about the attacks of multinationals, also in justice, the access of justice they have, the trials they have, the costs of justice, which are very fine, the defamation campaigns against them that put friends against them, and all the organizations that are forbidden. What do you think about that?
Who wants to respond? Gerald, I think, yeah?
Maybe Michel wants to come in as well, but I think in the film you've seen that there's a conglomerate of interests that defenders touch, and that is the threat usually. There's a state interest, there's corruption in the state, there are multinational, in various layers, these companies. I mean, it's not just one company that is there, but they operate in so many different layers, and the threat often comes also from that side. The private security people that they employ. And I think one of the things we see when we protect human rights offenders in those type of situations, you often don't actually know who is at the origin of the threat. Because it is so unclear and sometimes deliberately unclear. And there is enormous work to be done in terms of corporate accountability, business and human rights. There's a lot of things happening, but a lot more that has to happen. And it's very easy for an outside multinational company to say, well, we don't control exactly who is on the ground, but they benefit and are part of that system. But there's one other element that I think in a debate in Geneva that always strikes me. When we say multinational companies, we automatically think about our Western companies. How many times have you seen in the film the Chinese flag being on the table there? Because more and more you have that, you have companies that are not Western bound, which you reach even more difficultly in terms of human rights dialogue. And that is a huge changer in the protection of human rights and the protection of human rights offenders in many parts of the world, and certainly in Africa, but also in Asia. And it changes completely how the zones of influence are. What can Europe do? What are others doing? Sadly, the reaction of European governments is often to say, well, our trade interests become so fragile, so we have to find a softer landing route, as they often use the term. But what does it mean to a defender then in Cambodia? It means that the only outside influence is China. So I think there is an enormous work to be done on business accountability, and especially in regards to defamation of human rights offenders on the ground, because that is often the very roots of the problem.
Would you like to add something, Michel?
Peut-être juste pour compléter, c'est aussi un élément qu'on voit très fort dans le film à plusieurs reprises, c'est le mécanisme de consultation. Et la source du problème, l'une des sources du problème, est probablement la question de la consultation des populations ou des personnes affectées par les projets internationaux, que ce soit un grand projet international, une mine, un barrage ou autre. Et en fait, ce qui est clair, c'est que l'État passe un accord avec une compagnie ou avec une banque de développement pour développer une région sans consulter les populations. Et ensuite, le mécanisme de consultation est tel que la compagnie ou un mécanisme vient pour dire nous avons décidé de développer et non, on va vous consulter, mais on ne vous consulte pas sur la source même du problème. Et ce qui manque, en fait, et on le voit bien dans le film, c'est que les communautés affectées devraient tout simplement avoir le pouvoir de dire non. On vous consulte sur votre volonté de voir se développer la région d'une manière qui correspond à vos attentes et à vos aspirations. Et si la communauté dit non, alors la consultation devrait s'arrêter là. On ne consulte pas sur les mécanismes d'accompagnement d'un projet dont on ne veut pas. On le voit bien, les populations refusent les mécanismes d'accompagnement d'un projet dont elles n'ont pas au départ entendu parler. Et c'est l'une des sources d'un problème. Laissez-moi peut-être vous raconter une anecdote qui m'a beaucoup frappé. L'un de mes derniers rapports portait précisément sur la question des défenseurs confrontés au monde des entreprises internationales, multinationales. Il y a une compagnie qui me racontait, une compagnie européenne, italienne, qui travaille dans l'industrie extractive, qui me dit « Nous avons développé un mécanisme très sophistiqué de consultation, très en amont, ce que j'essaie de décrire. On va dans un pays et on consulte une communauté, une population locale pour leur dire « Nous avons un projet pour vous, et est-ce que vous voulez ce projet ?» On le décrit, on essaie d'inventer les charmes, les avantages, ce qui va accompagner le projet. Mais si la communauté refuse, alors dit la compagnie « Nous, on se retire ». Et qu'est-ce qui se passe ? Eh bien, c'est ce qu'a décrit Gerald. C'est une compagnie chinoise qui va arriver et qui va faire beaucoup plus de mal que la compagnie italienne qui, au départ, était animée de meilleures intentions, même si, au départ, le projet n'était pas voulu par la population. Donc, c'est un vrai problème. Certains États essaient de développer des mécanismes de consultation appropriés. Il y a tout un travail qui est fait, à l'heure actuelle, par le groupe de travail des Nations Unies sur entreprises et les droits de l'homme pour essayer de guider les entreprises, donner des clés qui permettraient de mieux établir des mécanismes de consultation, des protocoles de consultation pour les populations affectées, quelque chose qu'on va voir naître dans les semaines ou les mois qui viennent.
I saw the hand of a lady here with the green scarf in the front, please.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention et pour vos activités aussi. J'avais une question. À plusieurs reprises, on a relevé qu'il y avait une régression dans les pays développés, industrialisés, éduqués, des droits de l'homme. Comment ça s'explique, cette régression, et comment c'est possible que l'individu en tant que tel, alors qu'il a les moyens d'avoir l'éducation nécessaire, aujourd'hui remette en doute la protection que lui offrent les droits humains?
Who feels like you would like to?
I mean, I think it depends on context for sure. So it's different from country to country. I know that at least in Denmark, people feel threatened by the influx of refugees, and the politicians play on that. And so the media and the politicians, they use fear tactics because it's the best way to raise votes. And so, for example, in the last election, the Danish People's Party was able to get some of the highest number of votes in the country, even though they didn't used to be able to before, because of the fear-mongering. And what's really dangerous is when you start seeing some of the political parties who are supposed to be leftist join that campaign. And so in Denmark, what was, I think, quite surreal, that the Danish People's Party and the Social Democrats, who are supposed to be leftist and who are supposed to be, you know, pro-justice and so on, they were competing on who could create the better ads of anti-refugees and anti-immigration in Denmark. And to me, like, that's when the alarms need to start going off, because we understand that when the right-wing political parties are doing it, because that's a lot of what their politics is based on. But when the leftists start doing it as well, then that's, you know, extremely dangerous. The United States, I think, is a little different. I think in the United States, because the discourse on, you know, on racism, on sexism, on all of these different things is actually becoming stronger. That there's a group of, you know, people who believe in white supremacy and white nationalism who feel like they're at risk now. And so that becomes a lot stronger. And therefore there's also this want and need to believe in conspiracy theories, believing that the media is the enemy, believing that the government is the enemy, believing that we need someone in power who's going to take care of us, who's going to bring us back to that glory of before, where some people were a lot more privileged than others. So I think, again, it really depends on the context, but that's, I think, why we're seeing so much of this nationalism come up and so much of this populism, because of so much of it is based on information that a lot of times is not accurate. And so if you look at the actual studies that have been done, countries that take in refugees usually have better economies than they did before they did take in the refugees, right, in the long term, and so on. So there's a lot of misinformation, and it's not by coincidence, it's on purpose that there is that misinformation. And it's to get those votes, is to raise this kind of fear. And I think, and I'll end with this, the thing that scares me the most is that it's a vicious circle. Because what we see is, we have, these politicians who create this type of fear-mongering and use the media to do that as well. They get elected because they create so much fear amongst the population of, these bad, evil people who are going to come and take over the country, that they elect them into power. These people then give weapons and deals to governments like Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, like others, who usually are at the very core of creating radicalization and extremism. And then that leads to terrorist attacks and violence, which then only refeeds into this fear-mongering and the creation of fear and hate politics that is happening in Europe. And so it becomes a cycle where it just feeds into itself. And until we can break that cycle, whether it's through the stopping of the selling of arms, whether it's through pushing countries to respect human rights, to decrease radicalization, and I think this is one of the biggest threats of shutting down civil society space and where human rights defenders can't work anymore, is that generally in countries where you no longer have human rights defenders because they're all in prison or in exile, that's when you see a rise in radicalization and extremism, and it's a result of oppression. And so until we start understanding that also here in Europe, I think the cycle is going to continue.
Interesting. It's getting late, but let's have a couple of questions. I think I saw some arms over here. Someone who wanted to ask a question. Oh, you changed your mind? Okay, here. Go ahead.
Je vais essayer de parler en français et je vous remercie beaucoup pour les éclaircissements que vous nous avez donnés. Mais moi, j'aimerais raconter une histoire. L'histoire que je vais raconter, je suis rwandais. Et au Rwanda, quand les choses sont passées, les gens sont venus nous dire qu'ils ne savaient pas ce qui s'est passé. Et aujourd'hui, il y a beaucoup de pays qui vivent comme le Rwanda aujourd'hui. Quelle est la réaction des gens comme nous, à gauche, à droite? Moi, j'aimerais que chacun de nous puisse dire, voilà, je peux faire ça. Sinon, plaider l'ignorance, ça ne peut pas marcher. Et ce qui se passe en Syrie aujourd'hui, ce qui se passe ailleurs, il y a autant de guerres, de sang, de gens sacrifiés, et personne ne bouge. Comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour que les gens se sentent
Ça, c'est la question.
Plus jamais. Plus jamais.
Any of you feel like you want to comment on that and answer that? He's asking for more.
Je crois peut-être que c'est une question qui est aussi une forme de conclusion de notre débat, au fond,
oui.
Qui est une manière d'appel. Il n'y a pas de conclusion, sinon que tout le monde peut rejoindre votre appel à s'engager et en faire plus. Et je crois qu'effectivement, avec les outils que nous avons à l'heure actuelle, avec la connaissance meilleure que nous avons maintenant de ce qui se passe dans le monde, où rien ne peut plus être maintenant caché, on a besoin d'être plus nombreux, plus engagés, donc engagez-vous.
I saw one last hand. A woman at the very back who wants to ask the last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Bonsoir, Tashidelek. I'm Diki from Tibet, refugee born stateless in India. And today is my question goes to Special Rapporteur. Today is a commemoration of 59th Uprising Day, and we had a very big peace march in Nation, but we realized that actually the public is here, UN is sleeping. And my question actually goes to human situation of Tibet. The media, the sensation, the solidarity is disappearing, unfortunately, like many cases about ethnic minorities, indigenous issues, environmental vulnerabilities in this world. But China, we know, is going very strong. But the hope is there. My question is about human rights defenders. Which human rights defenders issues that Special Rapporteur is following up on Tibet? Because we listen right now that most of the time the defenders, people who live who are marginalized, the groups who are vulnerable, they are not informed. So which kind of cases you are following up on Tibet? And the second question is, if any of the human rights defenders who are on the stage, if you can give us any feedbacks, ideas, how we as Tibetans can bring Tibet issue to the next stage, because our movement is non-violent, it's about freedom, it's about being visible, and we want to live.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see if Michel wants to say something about the situation and bring up.
Rapidement, donc non pas pour évoquer la situation au Tibet qui ne relève pas en tant que tel de mon mandat. Mon mandat porte sur les défenseurs, et les défenseurs tibétains, bien évidemment, rentrant dans le cadre du mandat. Donc je reçois effectivement beaucoup d'informations, des communications, des plaintes de vos amis et collègues du Tibet, pour lesquels on agit de la même manière qu'on agit avec tous les États, avec les mêmes systèmes de communication, de diplomatie confidentielle qu'on a également avec les autres États. Et bien évidemment, les résultats ne sont pas à la hauteur des espérances, et le dialogue qu'on peut avoir sur la question tibétaine n'est sans doute pas à la hauteur de vos espérances, ni à la hauteur de mes propres attentes.
Maybe just on this one, I think, first of all, solidarity on this very special day for Tibet. And I think it's also where we have to be careful internationally. China is becoming so powerful, and it tries to immunize this issue. When I grew up, Tibet, when you said human rights, probably many people in Germany would have said Tibet as one of the examples. I'm not sure it's still the case. And I think we cannot permit that countries basically immunize whole discussion and insulate discussions on major human rights causes, and I think Tibet is part of this.
And also, as you really express your wish to work and for things to get better actually in Tibet, and that is exactly the role and this passion for human rights defenders that you all have here, and that I think it sounded like you also have, and I wish you best of luck. And I want to thank you, the four of you. It's been very interesting, really indeed, listening to you. You gave different perspectives, concrete examples, and there is hope. There is hope for more engagement. There is hope for less impunity. And I really wish you best of luck. And thank you all of you for coming and listening.